The kitchen echoed with the clatter of dishes and the aroma of freshly baked bread. My mother, seated across from me, let out a sharp laugh that cut deeper than she probably realized. "No wonder you're still single at 35, she said, her words laced with mockery rather than concern. I felt my cheeks flush, the familiar sting of her judgment settling in like an old wound reopened. I had heard variations of this before, at family gatherings, during quiet dinners, even in passing conversations. To her, my worth was tethered to a ring on my finger. To me, my worth was something I was still learning to define on my own terms. But before I could form a reply, a small voice pierced the tension. My 5-year-old looked up from the crayons scattered across the table, her innocent eyes wide with honesty. "Grandma!" she called out brightly, her voice carrying louder than intended. The room went silent. My mother's laughter faltered, her expression softening as reality settled in. Yes, I was 35. Yes, I was single. But sitting beside me was a living, breathing testament that I wasn't alone, unloved, or incomplete. I had built a life, one filled with resilience, love, and the courage to walk my own path, even when it didn't align with hers. In that moment, I realized that my daughter had done what I couldn't. She reminded my mother, and maybe even me, that life isn't measured by milestones checked off a list. It's measured by love that exists in the here and now, in the bonds we nurture, and the courage it takes to stand firm in who we are. So, to every woman who has ever been told she is too old, too single, or too late, hear me clearly. You are not behind. You are exactly where you are meant to be. Your story doesn't lose value because it looks different from someone else's. When society tells you that you're incomplete, remember this. Sometimes the loudest truth comes from the smallest voices. The sting of my mother's words cut through me like glass, sharp and unrelenting. It wasn't just the sentence itself. It was the way she said it. So casually, as though reducing my entire existence to a single flaw was nothing more than a joke over breakfast. Her laugh wasn't cruel in the way villains laugh in movies, but it carried something far heavier. Disappointment dressed up as humor. For years I had grown used to it. Those offhand remarks that reminded me I was not where she thought I should be in life. I was expected to have a husband by now, perhaps 2 or 3 kids, a house that echoed with the sound of family dinners. Instead, I was still the one she saw as lagging behind, stuck in a chapter that, according to her, should have already been finished. The weight of her judgment didn't fall lightly either. It echoed in my mind with every glance she gave, every comparison she made between me and cousins or neighbors who had followed the so-called traditional timeline. I wanted to defend myself, to tell her that I had chosen my own road, one that didn't need to mirror anyone else's. But my throat tightened, and my heart sank in that familiar way it always did when I felt like I was being measured against expectations I never asked for. For a split second, I almost believed her words, almost believed that maybe something was wrong with me, that maybe my singlehood at 35 was a sign of failure rather than choice. And that sting, that quiet ache that she never seemed to notice, lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Just as the weight of her laughter pressed down on me, a voice so small yet so powerful broke the silence. My daughter, with her tiny hands gripping a crayon and her wide, curious eyes, looked up and called out, "Grandma!" The words slipped from her lips with such innocence, so free of judgment, that it felt like a bell ringing through the room. For a moment, everything stopped. My mother's smirk froze on her face. My own heart skipped, and even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to hush in respect to that single word. There was no hesitation in her tone, no second guessing, just the pure truth of a child recognizing love where it exists. To her, my mother wasn't a critic, a judge, or a voice of disapproval. She was simply Grandma, someone who belonged to her world. That unfiltered honesty shifted the atmosphere. My mother, who moments before had wielded her words like little daggers, now sat caught in the mirror of my daughter's gaze. The irony wasn't lost on me either. While she mocked me for not having enough, the living proof of love and family sat right there beside me, her laughter and innocence filling the spaces her grandmother's words tried to hollow out. It was in that second I felt the tension in my chest loosen. My daughter had done what I couldn't bring myself to do. She reminded us both of the truth. That I wasn't empty. That I wasn't behind. that life had already given me something priceless, even if it didn't fit into the script my mother kept clinging to. What struck me most in that moment was how a single innocent word could shift the entire perspective of the room. What had moments earlier felt like a wound, her laughter, her judgment, her reminder that I hadn't checked off the boxes society had laid out, suddenly didn't hold the same power. My daughter's voice reframed everything. The very thing my mother had mocked me for, being single at 35, seemed so small in comparison to the fullness of the life I had in front of me. A child's eyes don't see timelines, social pressure, or so-called failures. They see love, presence, and belonging. To her, I wasn't behind. I was her whole world, the one who tucked her in at night, the one who made her laugh until her belly ached, the one who showed her what strength and care looked like. And in that innocence was a truth I had been too weary to embrace fully. My mother's words were a reflection of her own expectations, shaped by her own life, her own regrets, maybe even her own fears. But my daughter's words, they were a reflection of love in its purest form. It reminded me that perspective is everything. One person can choose to see lack, while another can see abundance in the very same moment. Suddenly, I no longer felt the sting of being judged. I felt the quiet triumph of knowing that my life, as unconventional as it seemed to her, was still meaningful, still rich, and still deeply rooted in love. As I sat there, the echo of my daughter's voice still hanging in the air, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had carried the weight of being different, of not fitting into the mold that was expected of me. I had fought silent battles with loneliness, with doubt, and with the nagging thought that maybe my mother was right. But looking at my little girl, watching her chatter away without a single care for what anyone thought, I realized how far I had come. My life hadn't been easy, but every hardship had shaped me into someone stronger, someone resilient enough to stand tall, even when the world tried to shrink me down. I thought back to the nights I spent building a life from scratch, working long hours to provide, finding joy in small victories like our first apartment, or the laughter we shared over silly routines. Those moments, though invisible to others, were proof of my strength. I wasn't lacking. I was thriving in ways that couldn't be measured by a wedding ring or a title. My mother's words had always tried to define me, but my journey had already written its own definition, one of courage, persistence, and self-worth. And in that moment, I knew that I didn't need anyone's approval to validate the choices I had made. My daughter's love was proof enough that I had built something real, something lasting, something worthy of pride. And so, instead of shrinking beneath the weight of her judgment, I felt a new kind of courage rising within me. It was as if my daughter's innocent declaration had unlocked something I had been carrying quietly for years, a reminder that my worth was never meant to be measured by someone else's calendar or checklist. I thought about all the women who had been told they were too much or not enough, who were whispered about at family gatherings, or laughed at in the way my mother had just laughed at me. How many of us had been made to feel small for walking a path that didn't match the script society had written? I realized then that the greatest rebellion was to live fully, unapologetically, in the life I had chosen. To show my daughter that happiness isn't bound to deadlines or defined by someone else's approval. That courage is waking up each day and choosing love. Whether it comes from a partner, a child, a friend, or even from within ourselves. My mother's laughter might have tried to belittle me, but my daughter's voice reminded me of a deeper truth. I was not behind, I was not incomplete, and I was not failing. I was living, building, and creating a legacy of resilience that my little girl would carry with her long after the judgments faded. And in that, I found a call not just for myself, but for anyone who has ever been told they're running out of time. Your life is not a race. It is a story, and you hold the pen.